Today we're joined by Top Cut winners Bernardo and RHS David, obviously myself and Justice, but we've got a lot to get through with the DLC Ghent and all the news that comes with that. And as always, we start off with those stats. So Justice, take it away for us.
Yeah, so really exciting weekend here. This was our first 4K DLC, so split across 2 days, Friday and Saturday, and there was a slightly different turnout across both of those days, but both of them tracked pretty closely to the sort of day one average. The big real change was the green-yellow difference between day one and day two was actually 14% on Friday and 18% on Saturday. But aside from that, everything else was basically exactly where you'd expect it to be. No real surprises here. Purple Steel, Blurple, Green Yellow, top three decks. We expected that coming in. Everything else came in sort of about the range you would expect it to. But, moving on to day two, right, we see a massive consolidation into those top three. And then things really get interesting when we get to the top cut portion of the event where it's dogs' meta and everyone else is living in it, right? 34% for dogs. Blurple's only at 22, Purple Steel 17, and then green, blue, and yellow, purple were the other real standouts here. Although a couple of Amber Steel lists did make it in to the top 32. They had a bit of a showing this weekend, but no, really the highlight here is look at that dog's conversion ratio to top 64, and yellow purple really nice as well, where I think those players dodged the dogs matchup and got to feast on the almost 60% day two share of Purple Steel and Blurple. They actually found a really nice way into the top cut. But we all saw how the grand final went, right? 3 out of 4 decks in the local finals of each event were green-yellow, and then Dan took it home in the grand finals in the yellow-purple mirror, or the green-yellow mirror.
Yeah. Bernardo, having a look at this data, the, dogs is kind of dominating the meta game as we've seen, and this conversion ratio is even higher than we saw last week. What does that scream to you? Do you think we all need to be playing dogs at this point in the game?
Probably. It kind of screams that Justice been right for a while. He's been screaming this loudly for a little bit now. I think probably yes, or we need to be adapting to dogs quite heavily. It screams a little bit that we might be heading towards a potential tier 0 deck, which we haven't had in Lorcana in quite a while. It's a very different one than what we've had in the past, but it still has the rather not the best mirror. So I think people are not thrilled about it. Looking a little bit at the streams, it does have really good play patterns into everything that's not the mirror.
Yeah. David, do you think you'd add anything to that? Do you think there's anything that can contend with dogs at the moment?
There's definitely decks that can compete with dogs, but the problem they have is the huge meta share of both Amethyst Steel and Blurple are just feasting on all the decks that could combat dogs. So it's probably not that dogs is super incredibly broken. It's just that everything that can compete with it is getting eaten up by the decks that Blurple just farms. So that dogs just farm, sorry. So potentially we need to see dogs meta share rise for its conversion rate to lower and allow potentially some of these ruby decks to thrive. I know there were a couple of cool ruby decks that appeared at the weekend. So hopefully they can increase in numbers and take down the dogs.
I mean, Justice, you've had something to say about that in the past. I know historically people have been quite vocal saying that Red Purple has had really good game into dogs, and I think that's not an opinion that you share. Could you explain that a little bit more for us with these Ruby decks coming in? Do you think that changes anything?
Yeah, so I've obviously been kind of vocal about this discussion. I've even, I've had it with David, I've had it with other players about Ruby Amber, Ruby Amethyst. Are these actually effective dogs counters? And if you look at the data says yeah, those decks are beating dogs a lot of the time. In some cases, an overwhelming amount of the time. But if you talk to top dogs players, this is an opinion that I share with Zan Syed. Dogs does not have a bad Ruby Amethyst matchup. That matchup is just fine for the dogs player if you're on Chromicon. And so I think there are ways to counter the deck, right? I think the Blurple build that you and David played for this event is the right kind of innovation to try and tackle that problem without actually giving up equity into the other parts of the meta that are still being played. But I actually don't know if just Ruby as a color is the dog's predator that people think it might be if Blurple was a less relevant part of this meta share, right? I think people need to find different ways of interacting with the deck to try and slow it down.
Yeah, I'd agree with that a lot. So I'll go to my deck first. So this is the deck that I made top 32 on the Friday segment of the DLC. And I agree with you that we really need to be looking at different shells and adapting our list to fight dogs. The traditional lines of going for Genie on the play, kind of hoping that the dog's play is just going to leave you alone and not under the CU, that's just not acceptable anymore. I think we really need to start putting something in there to fight for the board. So this is a list that me and I'm sure the rest of you are very familiar with at this point, but for our viewers at home, this is a list that the UK lot got together, and we adapted this kind of shell into something that we thought had good game into the rest of the field. The main thing here is the Isis Vanderchill, which just kind of allows you to play an exert effect a turn earlier before Elsa, which on the play allows you to target the Grandmother Willow in the dogs matchup, or against Purple Steel allows you to target their 2 cost or their 3 cost to try and take them off being able to sing, and just disrupting your opponent that turn earlier. I have found effects like that to be absolutely incredible over the weekend. I played into dogs 4 times and beat it all 4 times, and the only reason I did was because of this card here, this Vanderchill. And then we're looking at some other cards like the Scrooge to be able to get under Chromacon. David is somebody that's like being pretty with me on this list from start to finish. What do you think about this? Like, how did you feel about your matches? We'll show your list in a second, but the new shell, do you agree with me in the sense that like we need to be dropping Genie?
Yeah, so I've been Genie's biggest hater, and I've been preaching it for weeks now. I just think the metagame is too hostile for it. The game is going at an accelerated pace now where Genie, like, yeah, it gives you good value on the play, but sort of the issue we decided was that on the play, Blurple is so powerful, but on the draw, actually, it was falling behind in not only the dogs matchup, but also against Purple Steel. Now they've got that aggressive line they can do with Christopher Robin and Pocahontas, and then on turn 3 or 4, they've already got 10 lower. The game's already halfway done, so Genie just wasn't cutting it. I think with Isis, what she allows you to do is not even into dogs or Purple Steel, just into any deck. You can just determine what the weakest piece of their board is, remove it, not bounce it like a card like Tigger would do. Remove that piece, it's no longer an issue, and then you can then do your traditional lines, and then on turn 6 you play Demona, you take away all the strong pieces, and then just start generating advantage. And then Scrooge, yeah, he in theory gets under Chromacon and was really good in testing, but unfortunately this weekend I never played against any Chromacon, so I'm not really sure how it would have went into good players. I think he would have got them, but it still probably needs a little bit more data to determine that.
Yeah. Did the Scrooge ever work for you in the mirror of being able to protect? I know for me, there was a couple of games where I just warded my entire board after singing Second Star and just kind of watching my opponent get frustrated of not being able to use any of those Let It Go effects or into the unknown effects on your board.
Yeah, so traditionally, Blurple has been this 4 Hades, 4 Let It Go, 4 Into the Unknown, a bunch of effects that exert, even Cheshire Cat and Bell. All of those effects target. With the exclusion of Genie, we determined that we needed something else to sort of keep that advantage and also potentially give us like a really huge swing turn. So getting to go sing Second Star with our board, either ward it or with the 5 cards we've drawn, find a Hades or our own Let It Go to target the strongest piece of their board that's going to clear our board back. And yeah, ward is just probably the best keyword in the game right now.
Yeah.
There's an argument for evasive, but ward is just so impossible to interact with.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Bernard, I'll come to you. I know you didn't take this list over the weekend. You opted for blue-green, which we'll get to a little bit later in the video. But I think it's fair to say that you've also been looking at a list like this and potentially been considering it. I'd be interested from your perspective of somebody that plays more of like a strong late game control piece that we've seen blue-green traditionally fall into. What do you think Are you interested in this? Would you change anything about it?
I'm definitely interested. In fact, I think I commented at a few of you that obviously in hindsight, I'm very happy I took blue green, but on Friday and late on Thursday, I was a little, especially when I found out, how well this build had actually done. I was a little jealous of not having spent a little bit more time with Blurple. Blurple's a deck I've also played a lot during sets 9 and 10. I took it to Bologna and Cardiff CCQ. Um, so yeah, I think it was a really good innovation. I think the litmus test for any of these sorts of innovations where you're targeting a deck is how it plays out into the field in general. And I think I personally underestimated the Scrooge a little bit in the interactions that it could create in the purple mirrors. Isis as well, I think, really has the potential to swing a tempo turn into both purple steel in the mirror more so than kind of the plays we were seeing before of just always opting for Genie on the play and trying to carry that through.
Yeah, just as obviously we had the heartbreak facing into each other in round 11 of Swiss. It was the third game of day two, and we were both on the bubble at this point, and it came down to whoever won knocked the other one out, which is just a terrible position to be in for any amount of friends, but like even worse for this podcast. But you I guess you got to sit there on the opposite side of the field and kind of experience this deck from full force and tell us about it. Like, how did this feel sitting as the dogs player? You're supposed to be farming Blurple, but it didn't happen. What went wrong?
I got absolutely battered, and I think the way I put it after we played was, it felt like every turn, the card in my head where I'm like, okay, this is what I don't want to see next turn, always came down, right? Like the Isis on curve, going second both games, just like removing the pieces, stopping me from getting any momentum, and then the surprise power of like the Ursula Vanessa into the Scrooge to unlock that kind of questing. We had a spot where it was late game 2. I've quested to like a decent amount, and your board is like the Scrooge you played before, a Vanessa with 4 damage on that took out a Shift Lady and like an Elsa or something. And my out is like, all right, if I tap like a go-go here, I can quest for enough and hit the go-go on the Vanessa for 4 and win the game. And you just kind of look at that board and you play another Scrooge and turn everything sideways and are questing so much faster than I am. And the minute that Scrooge came down, the game was closed and there was like nothing I could do. And it just felt like really, really impressive, right? You sang the second star of that game. I think at one point you like early magical maneuvers to me, same effect as the Isis, and took out a piece I kind of needed to stabilize more. And yeah, wow, like the extra interaction points of all those extra exert effects really give this deck the ability to fight back into dogs.
Yeah. Obviously, that was the intention of when we built this deck, was to try and interact with people's boards as much as possible. Traditionally, we've seen in the game of Lorcana, people just kind of stack the boards up. I don't know if anyone disagrees here, but I've been finding that people just stack the boards up and kind of going with the mentality of deck builder that they're going to go first and they're going to be the one that does all these powerful effects. And then when we have things like the Elster 5 cost in the meta, we just get so used to going, oh, my opponent's going to exert my board on turn 4, and I can just build my deck around that. There's nothing, I don't need to worry about these first 3 turns, which is why we're seeing the Tramp get off, which is why we're seeing Under the Sea get off so often. David, I'll go back to you. Why do you think that, in terms of like deck building, we kind of fall into that trap and stop doing the kind of innovation that we've seen over this weekend? Because I've also got your list here, which is nearly identical to mine, although you were making a couple of changes, and I'll let you speak about that in a second. But really, to hone the point on the question, like, why are we falling into the trap as players of not bringing in this innovation and just kind of thinking that we're going to get away with these stepping blocks?
Yeah, I think it's mainly due to with the pro players that are putting out content, specifically on social medias, showing these standard decks almost and repeatedly having success with them. I know sort of DKP and Jonathan Lamb played a pretty much stock Blurple list to Melbourne, and if you don't watch the finals, you would think that that sort of deck is in a really good position to perform well. But then you watch the finals into Dogs, that deck just folded to a Chromacon. And also, in the same sense, that list is going to fold to Sailor's list that is also aggressively under the scene. So I think it's really easy to sort of think about your curve going 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, win the game. But actually, when you think about how your opponent can interact with your board, on turn 3 or turn 4, if your board isn't developing as well, you're just not going to go anywhere. So the inclusion of cards like Isis Vanderchill, she is a 4/4, and like that sort of 4 strength, 4 willpower is something that is really tricky to interact with. I think something that you've not noted yet is we decided to change our 1-drop from Palace Guards to Rafiki. There are so many characters in the 1 and 2 cost slot that have 3 willpower. And Royal Guards just wasn't cutting it because they just keep those characters upright for the longest time. Or if they are turning them, it means they don't care about that piece. And if you get to punish it, it's irrelevant. So I know, similar to your list, I decided to almost go a bit more in on the Scrooge. I recognised that it was going to create some unfair lines, but there are these boost cards, specifically Alice, 4 cost. She's not great if she's a 6-drop, but if you play her on turn 3 and then you play an Elsa, remove a piece, and then on turn 5 she's automatically boosted, you can keep applying the pressure with her, and your opponent's probably just going to ignore her. Then the next turn you're getting to follow up by drawing 2 cards. You get to play another Elsa, play another Isis, and just take over the game. I think another interesting card I chose to play was They Never Come Back. I sort of recognised if Dogs or Purple Steel sort of hit their nut draw line, interrupting their board isn't good enough, but my deck's actually strong enough to flip the question math with cards like Ursula. So if I deploy my Ursula, I deploy my Scrooge, it'll get to that turn where I actually don't need to remove the board, I can just freeze it. And then it also came as like my sort of second Iago hate piece. That was another card we identified as being super relevant in the metagame, but we were probably wrong on that. I think Iago in theory was great, but in practice he was probably the weakest card on my list.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, the vanish keyword is always really hard sell, especially once. Like, people have to look at this weekend's data, right? They have to look at the fact that Dog's doing so well this week and start making changes, and whether or not that's fire the cannons or other effects like that. Justice, you've been vocal about fire the cannons in the past and said that you don't like the card, but is it time for that card to come back? Something's got to be done. People can't just keep letting Dogs get away with the kind of stampede that is going down.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a notorious fire the cannons hater, but I will concede that it is somewhat effective if you can use it to smack down the Willow while they're trying to set up. But if you're purple steel, that means you're playing something like 1-drop into 1-drop, and you're leaving yourself vulnerable to interaction from Under the Sea at that point. You're not going into something more powerful like a Calhoun or a Pocahontas. Personally, I'm probably more scared in purple steel specifically when they go into something like Christopher Robin Pocahontas Genie and just threaten to race out, because that is generally their most consistent path to winning. But the thing I keep saying is that, your Dog's testing plan needs to involve dealing with Chromacon and Lilo. And if your deck can't deal with Chromacon and Lilo, or you can't win out from under it, you kind of need to go back to the drawing board, because, those 2 cards are just a cornerstone in a lot of these Dog decks. Not all of them, but, even in some of all of the Dogs lists we're seeing that aren't radically different, that Chromacon is still doing a lot of work.
Just another thing that I wanted to point out about these 2 lists that I think it's a little nuanced, but it's I think quite clever, potentially part of the success of the lists. I think in cutting Genie, you got rid of a lot of the under the sea interaction, because sometimes you're the Blurple player, you're setting up your turn 1 Rafiki into turn 2 Tipo, turn 4, turn 3 Genie, turn 4 Elsa, and the Dogs player is going like this under the sea is going to be huge, and just win the game, potentially even with just a single Mickey now singing it. And I think you kind of removed a lot of those interaction points. I think the concern there from cutting Genie is how do you then potentially win the race into dogs, which you eventually have to do, which is why I think then it's also clever adding things like They Never Come Back, adding things like Ursula back that are harder for them to interact with, but still allow you to like claw back the race. The other thing is the Genie had had for the longest time a really big cost in deck building in terms of uninkables. It Cutting it allowed you to add back a card that I've notably been a little bit of a hater in the past, namely set 9 with second star to the right, because back then you had to include Genie. I was actually playing at the time the Genie 3/5 on 4 in replacement of it because it's a little bit more consistent in putting off. But that's because we were running all these uninkables, right? When you suddenly get rid of 4 uninkables in the deck, you can put something as powerful as a second star, which then also is really interesting. And I'm sure won you a lot of purple steel games, at least in my testing, that was really relevant. And that's how the set 9 story was as well. If you ever played second star to the right into purple steel, they just never came back.
Yeah, I love this second star. It's such a powerful effect. It's probably the most powerful card you can play in the purple shell. And even, as Justice was saying earlier, being able to play it in the Dog's Mirror if they gas off for a turn or two, and you can just sing this and draw a ton of cards, giving yourself all the options you need. It's a really, really strong effect, but it does come at the cost of the uninkable slots. And I've been finding that sometimes 8 or 9 uninkable slots in a Blurple shell is just too much. But I don't want to talk about Blurple for just too much longer because we've had quite a good segment on that. I do want to move back to the Boogeyman in the room. So Justice, this was your list that you played over the weekend, coming top 64. Some notable inclusions here is the Rajar that you played as a 2 of. It's a 3/4, 3 mana, that's 3 ink that quests for 1 and it has Bodyguard. Did this do anything for you? How did the list perform over the weekend for you?
The list performed pretty great. I lost 3 matches, one of them to a sort of Bobby Nani sequencing mistake, where if I played the Bobby first and hit the Under the Sea, or the Tramp 7, if there was one there, that gave me like an out that I lost as soon as I played the Nani and saw the Under the Sea on top into the mirror. And then I lost to Blue Steel, where I didn't really see any staying power into that matchup, and I lost to you in round 11, which was similar to that, but with a much higher threat level coming out of the Blurple deck to like not even give me a chance to try and draw into some of the answers there. But the deck performed like exceptionally well otherwise. The Raja is probably the worst card in the list. I wanted to play a few more characters that had 3 attack to try and mitigate the mirror when you don't hit the Under the Sea off the Tramp. But I also wanted to keep my Under the Sea and Chronicon numbers up both. The deck performed great, and I would probably run it back. I would make changes realistically, but I think on a slightly different day, making top cuts still would have been possible on this list, and maybe that just speaks to how strong this deck is overall right now, right? And that dogs is just kind of doesn't matter exactly how you skew it; it's performing really well.
A version of dogs that performed what we could call optimally over the weekend was Dan. So not only did he win the Friday bracket, but he also took the entire thing, getting his world invite. So congratulations to him. I know that he was putting in a lot of effort. We happened to go out for ice cream the previous night, and then he was like, "Nope, sorry, gotta go jam games." And it's like that was like 9 o'clock. We're like, "Oh my gosh, it's so early to be jamming games," but he ended up taking this entire tournament by storm. And we're seeing some things here that are a little bit different. The Finnick, for example, the reduction of the Daisy, which I have always thought was a staple to the list, but now we're seeing it being replaced with this lady uninkable that we did see removed, but is coming back in. Bernardo, I'll come to you first. This type of list that Zan's been playing, do you think that there's merit to him changing it, or that I don't want to say, do you think he just got lucky, because obviously there's an element of skill there, but which side do you sit on there? Do you think it's more leaning towards one, or the tech pieces that are helping him out there?
I think it was really cleverly built. A lot of I didn't spend quite as much time on dogs as I would have liked, but one of the things that I definitely agreed towards the end with Justice was that I wanted to play a combination of Under the Sea in Chromicon. Intuitively, I wanted to play 6 of those effects, but I was always like the uninkable cost of this is really, really high. I think by cutting some of that, some of the daisies, and the lady, of course, is uninkable as well, but has a little bit more synergy with the rest of the deck. You kind of can justify going up on that. I like the inclusion still of 2 Chromicons because I think it just makes some matchups unnecessarily complicated. Things like red purple that otherwise might be much more trivial with if you're running Chromicon. Um, I haven't played with Finnick, so I'm not sure how it performed for him, and maybe someone with more experience on dogs can talk a little bit about that. But the only other thing that jumped out in the list that I personally had the opposite opinion was the Mowgli Ursula split. Maybe it's because I was on blue green and people with more Ursulas were more scary than people with more Mowglis. I was leaning more towards bigger count of Ursula relative to Mowgli, even though I did want to split.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. David, as his teammate, did you see this list before it came out? Were you involved in the testing experience at all?
So what I would say from sort of a rare hunter's perspective, I went to bed on Friday night thinking that Zan had locked in Purple Steel. The deck had performed really well in testing, but Zan, being the grinder that he is, he stayed up all night, wasn't really sure what he wanted to play, and he came to the revolution that he had to play dogs. He was always quite locked on the Finnick card. He said it has a lot of value. It gets to, similar to the Isis or the Tigger, it bounces back a key piece on a board. Against the purple decks, it gets to bounce back a genie. So your Chromicon, in theory, with Finnick gets to bounce 2 cards. A lot of people, when I watch Zan play, would get their card removed by Finnick. They would then play a card like Elsa or Strengths, and they would remove Nanny, and then the Finnick would get bounced back, and then remove another piece. But in the opposite sense, if you remove the Finnick, the Nanny gets to survive, and then that's generating more advantage. So yeah, I would say from sort of the dog's perspective, everyone else on the team was on the sort of 4 Under the Sea 1 Chromicon, play the Mickey Champion, but also include the Daisy Ducks. I'm not sure what revelation he came to that he had to cut the daisies from the deck. It was potentially the inclusion of 4 Lady Ones to sort of give that aggressive tempo switch in the mirror. I know in the mirror from watching a lot of dogs matches over the weekend, it was normally whoever resolved the first explosive Under the Sea wins the game. And I guess having access to the 8-4 shift line as well as the 4 tramps and the 4 Under the Seas, you get to do that more reliably.
Yeah, it seems like a smart idea for me. Like you said, just being able to shift the lady to kind of take that surf off curve. So I've always felt like when I was doing the testing that whoever went first was at an advantage in the mirror because you could put your tramp down first and find the Under the Sea, and then you would get sing at 8 on the field quicker. But now that we're running these 8 lady effects so that you can shift into it, it almost negates that a little bit, because if you have with the 4 Under the Sea in the deck, you've got a higher chance of finding it, and then you can just shift and cast it when your opponent's not expecting it. Justice, as our residential dogs expert, like, does that make sense to you? Do you think cutting this daisy and going into this more shift line to kind of break that surf is the way that people should be moving towards these dog shells?
100%. The access to those 8 extra shift targets, and Daisy was the correct cut for that. It's very obvious, I think, when you look at this list and when you see how it played out in, I caught the grand finals at the venue and got to see, Zan flipping multiple games with that turn 3 shift lady Under the Sea. And by having access to those extra shift targets, you sort of dramatically increase your ability to get there. But the Finnick also put in an exceptional amount of work. One of the cards we were talking seriously about in our sort of tech slot for our dogs testing was the 4-cost genie that gives 2 attack to everything when it's exerted. Everything else, it has 2 attack. So the idea was you put that genie down and you can't be under the seed in the mirror. The Finnick in this list is terrifying, because if I'd come up against Zan in that grand final playing Genie 4 and he's on this Finnick, I'm losing that grand final like every time, especially with the additional access to the shift Under the Sea that he has from the extra lady shift targets. Just all in all, a really excellent list. The only thing that, I'm in agreement with you on was the sort of Ursula Mowgli split. Basically, everyone I know is favoring a much higher Ursula count, possibly no Mowgli. And, I don't know if he had a specific reason for going with the way that he did on that, but, I can't fault anything else on the list.
No, it looks really, really solid for a list. It's like a masterclass in kind of assessing the threat and then bringing something that attacks it from all angles. Talking about bringing a list, Bernardo, this was again probably not on my radar. We've spoken about it in the past on the channel that blue green has a place in the metagame, especially since people aren't really considering it as a massive threat, and that kind of lets it go under the radar a little bit and come in. And you actually won a golden Mickey with this. I think it's your first golden Mickey. Is that correct? So
Correct.
Oh, look at it there.
huge congratulations on that. Do you want to break this down for us? Explain why you brought this to the event and then how it performed.
Sure. It's probably more like a chronological piece rather than really why I chose this deck. Um, I was actually quite low on the deck towards the end of the testing, and ended up choosing it more based on having been able to shore up some of the perceived weaknesses that we had in testing, and then just the number of reps. Because things changed dramatically from when I originally took this list or a version of this list to the Axiom CCQ. I felt it was extremely well positioned for that meta because I was expecting around 50% representation of blue decks, which ended up being the case. In the case of blue decks, mostly this wins due to Ink Geyser, and end up being the case in our match at Atlantis, but in general against average player that should be the case. However, then everything that could possibly go wrong for blue green went wrong. Thea won the event with an aggressive purple steel list that has more equity into blue green than a traditional one. Every purple steel game I had there, most of them I won, but they were all already very tight. Then we see dogs win 2 events in a row. The effect of that is not only that you get more dogs players in the room, but then they have to tech for the mirror, which means more Ursulas in the room as well, which isn't great for this deck because you can usually protect from Mowgli relatively easy. So leading up to the event, like I said, I was kind of low, but Heffalumps was something that Autumn, one of my teammates, brought up, had done well in an online event. So we tested that card. It did help tremendously into Purple Steel because of the being able to kill an illusion. Of course, also into Blurple with more Yago counts. Not that that's super needed there. And then it just sometimes helps stall out some of the questing into either Purple Steel or Dogs. The Dogs matchup is hard. I think I was never winning that event with so many good Dogs players. If you looked at the bracket, I had to face Dogs basically until the end of the tournament, so 4 more rounds, I think. However, I think into like the standard dogs player, this has game, and even into great dogs players, like I played in my Mickey Winninen, if you kind of play the deck with play to win mentality, where you set up the right turns, you weigh your odds on what you can get, you set up so that you can vision into something, or you can tunnel draw into something to avoid the Ursula. You still have game into that. So I ended up going on this based on familiarity with the deck and feeling like I could pilot it well. Other than that, mostly the deck is kind of stock. I guess maybe the other interesting thing is the Cookie side and stocked chaos. I just wanted a little bit more of a range of cards that I could have in those slots. Stocked chaos, I ended up playing by cutting a Basil because I felt like many times those cards could similarly, but stocked chaos can go to the Inkwell, which serves as your second hand in this deck when you're playing in Geyser. Yeah, that's basically it. Worked out for me. Had to be fortunate in a few spots, but I think it's a very hostile environment for this deck, and it's a little bit like playing in hard mode if you want to take it.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of discourse on the moment with the community about dogs, where it is in the meta, whether or not we're in a tier 0 format, which you mentioned at the beginning of the video. And then depending on where you sit in that Discord, some people are calling for bans, some people are not calling for bans and saying that we need more time to innovate. I like a list like this, like you said, it is kind of hostile into the meta that with dogs is growing, and I suspect we'll probably see more dogs come out of this. Just as you have Taiwan in a week, you leave tomorrow for that. We have to expect that dogs is going to increase in terms of representation there, and then we also have to expect that, you know, if you're going to Taiwan, you need to be having answers for that type of field game.
Yeah, I think, you know, expect dogs, but, you know, you faced dogs 5 times, Bernardo, in your run, and you won 3, and that's pretty impressive, right? It's a matchup that you would not expect to have as much game into, but, you know, green blue is a deck that can still go, you know, can get those wins sometimes, right? You have access to the Tipo into Shift Basil onto the Sea or Stopped Chaos lines, or, you know, the spooky sites and the Philip combo stuff. There's a lot of ways to potentially deal with it.
Yeah, this deck generally has a game or the ability to pull back a game almost every time, but it doesn't obviously work out like that because you're depending on what your visions are going to get you or your Donalds are going to get you.
David, I'll come to you quickly. Obviously, this is Sapphire adjacent, so it's running a different colour rather than running the Amethyst package that you and I were running. We're really leveraging into the Emerald. Having a look at this list, how would you feel about taking this to a tournament? We're running the Under the Seas, as Bonanno said. We're running the spooky sites to kind of attack that Dogs meta and that Purple Steel meta. Do you think this has its own place?
Yeah, absolutely. Green Blue was the deck that I explored during that set 9 format, and then into the latter half of the set 10 format, I took it to both CCQ Cardiff and DLC Bologna, making do finishes at both of those events. And then, unfortunately, we're not going to speak about what happened in Hong Kong when I took Blue Green to a best of 1 format. The deck is definitely not suited for that style of format. But I think sort of having extremely good matchups into the fair Amethyst decks with your Ink Geyser and your Clarabelle, especially on the play with your Welcome being able to just take apart boards and just gain significant advantage. I think you can take the risk that if you play super well into dogs, if they make one mistake, you can just capitalize on it, swing the board, and then with cards like John Silver and Prince Philip, they can never recover. I guess what I think super interesting about this list is choosing only to play 3 Baby Philip. That card feels super powerful for getting off your combos, and then the inclusion of Moana. I know I explored it as a Sapphire player, but I found her just to be super weak in the format and almost not really doing anything. So I'd like to hear what your opinions are on both those cards.
You can tell that you've played this deck before because you've touched basically on slots that I would maybe consider moving around a little bit. The Philip, the fourth Philip is probably the one card that I would have liked to play just because there were a lot of times where you wanted to set up, perhaps on your going into your foreign turn, sailing again and playing a Philip, even into dogs is sometimes very relevant. And again, it's got the ward keyword. It's very hard to interact with. So that's definitely a card I'd consider a fourth of. Um, Moana, I have kind of a love-hate relationship with the card. There is a very particular interaction with Moana in the deck that is very relevant in long games, which is I've mentioned before that Ink Geyser basically turns this deck into having 2 hands, your actual hand and then your inkwell. From the moment you ink on turn 1 to every inking decision, you're thinking, especially if you're playing into Sapphire Mirrors. What can I get back when I Inkizer? Because your ideal Inkizer turn is you have a Singer on board, you're pulling back a You're Welcome, you're pulling back a Stop Chaos, you're potentially pulling back a Baby Claravel, and you're setting up these very hard to interact boards. You're clearing maybe a big character of theirs, a Hades, a Demona, etc. So Moana allows you to recycle cards that you've already used. So your welcomes that you've put in the discard and have access to them later. The other thing is I still think like some of the more powerful things you can do with the deck are Cindy plays, especially just to filter to the next card, whilst also building up your inkwell. And I wanted just a couple of more princesses. At the end of the day, it was Ink maybe 90% of the games, and then I had a couple of games where it was an absolute blowout because I went Cindy into Moana and then Inkizer in a couple of turns.
It's a list that I really enjoyed watching you play. It's not one that I think I can do. I've always kind of been allergic to the Emerald cards. They've always felt uh, they're obviously really strong. Obviously, we have Under the Sea, which Dogs is making use of, which you're making use of, and we have the Prince Philip combo, which segues us actually very nicely into this deck list here, which I think was probably the most innovative list of the weekend. And feel free to disagree with me there, but I was not expecting this. I did think there was maybe something in green purple. I explored it very quickly, and then abandoned that idea just as quickly. But this type of list was not on my radar. It is not a shell that I thought I would build, and it just took me by complete surprise. And I had the very fortunate game of playing into him for my top 16 match, and he very swiftly beat me 2-0. it was crazy how good the deck was, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And he's a lovely guy. But Justice, I'll come to you. This type of innovation, this is what we want to see in the game. This is a good player coming to the table going, no, I want to do something different to the rest of the meta, and getting rewarded for it. He got top 16. Unfortunately, he lost his top 8 games, so he didn't get the Golden Mickey, but he's doing everything right.
I mean, this is just a really finely crafted list, right? I think like the ratios here, the 10-1 drops with the improvises flexing in there into something like Purple Steel when they open the Palace Guard, and the 2-drop slots actually being just the mini, the Shift Webby, and the guidebook, or strike a good match if that's what you're stuck on. But that also becomes like the mini's a great singer here with her 3/3 stat line. She doesn't get punished by anything effectively and gets to trade back into them. And then you're coming into this sort of powerful setup of 3 costs between the Cat and the Lewis, and then into really powerful questers late game, right? We've got the Genie, the Webby, the Philip, and the Mickey Snowboarder. Really, really thrilled that he made an appearance in the list, even if he's just a sort of one of here. And the one of Hades to give you that little bit extra draw power. And there is a lot of draw power in this list, right? We've got the 4 guidebooks, we've got the 4 Pull the Lever, the Genies, the Hades, the Strike a Good Matches. It's just doing a bit of everything, right? And it's got the full 4/4/4 Philip combo, couple of MKBs, and that one Under the Sea to try and get those Dogs players, or even to get those aggressive Purple Steel players or Blurple players who might have a board that's particularly vulnerable to it in the right moment. You can shift that Philip and sing the Under the Sea just as effectively as you can use the MMS. Or you can just sing it with something like your Hades and your Webby that's been sitting there warded and hard to interact with. It's just doing a little bit of everything really well. I think someone compared green-purple to red-purple of pre-rotation at some point, and I think this is a list that really kind of says that to me. I think this is just, you're playing solid ratios for good tempo into your late game sweepers.
Yeah. Bernardo, this is doing a lot of similar things that your deck was trying to do, in the sense of getting the shift target off with the Malicious Meaning scary combo to wipe the board. But do you think this type of shell with the more warded characters in the form of Weddy and the extra questing potential that it can bring to the table, but also the more consistent card draw? So I know a big thing for green-blue is that your card draw tends to leverage itself on Clarabelle and Donald Duck, and those can be really easy to play around with at the high tier level. But this, like, Pull the Lever, Strike a Good Match, the books, this can't be played around with. This is just I'm going to keep drawing and there's nothing you can do about it. would you ever be convinced to try a shell like this?
Yeah, I think there's definitely appealing things about this when you compare the kind of like two gameplays of the deck. Obviously, the Sapphire deck is a little bit faster getting to the big things, but the trade-off you have there is that all your characters don't do anything into, say, a dogs player other than sing. Whilst here we're setting up Royal Guard on one into potentially a mini on two, and then a Cheshire, or more importantly, a Lewis, which I think can be very disruptive to the gameplay of dogs or another aggressive deck. And I think that's appealing in the meta that we have right now. In terms of the card draw, yeah, I think like Justice said, that the list is kind of finely tuned. Um, Mostly it has actually set 10 cards. I played a very similar deck to this in the very beginning of set 10, but then it's got that inclusion of Strike a Good Match. So clearly they really wanted to try to find these combo pieces in the late game. So have like a strong curve and then find these potential combo pieces to disrupt the opponent in the late game. And it's really cleverly well built and works out for them. Very nice to see.
Yeah. David, I know that this was your round 12 opponent, but you did end up IDing that match, and you kind of talked a little bit about the list. Could you like feedback that to us? Can you maybe get an understanding of why the list was built the way it was? And I know that you were both sat there laughing with each other, kind of like the way that you were building and the pieces that you were doing. So yeah, just break that down for us, please.
Yeah, so I think sort of this list is applying the same sort of theory in the early game as we were, deploying powerful one drop characters. This deck doesn't get to ramp on two, so you either get to play your Shift Webby, which can act as ramp, or the Mini Mouse, which is incredible. Then you get to play Lewis on turn three, which, in the same way as Isis did for us, it actually removes a key piece on the board. It turns off Singer a lot of the time, and it's really, really difficult to interact with. I know a dog's deck, on even on the play, would struggle to deal the Lewis and Under the Sea, so more than likely they're losing a piece. No, I think we spent most of our time on table 3, I think it was, before our ID, just laughing about how we had the craziest decks in the top 10 tables, and we were just in shock that all these sort of stock standard lists were getting swept away by our innovation. I think for me, the key thing that seems to be sort of missing from this deck is like the counter exert effects. There's no Elsa, there's no Demona. Both of those cards have seemed sort of fundamental in the Amethyst Shell, and potentially that's where we went wrong when we built this deck initially. I know for me specifically, when I've built this deck before, I've went really hard on the Amethyst Shell, even including Dumbos, and then more evasive cards like the Geo Color Diablo 2. So potentially I just had to be greedier playing the tricky Emerald cards and really leaning on Strike a Good Match as my filter rather than Dumbo, and then using the powerful Under the Sea and Philip combo sort of to lock down boards.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think we as players always move towards these powerful cards and almost tunnel vision ourselves. And this has to go in the deck. This has to be a 4 of. Demona is a great example of that. When you build a deck and you put Demona in the list and we immediately think it's a 4 of. Or we spoke about it, but I don't want to get into it too much, but we spoke about like Genie, and Genie in the past has always been like a 4 of in Blurple Shells. I think that puts us in a position, it's kind of the topic of the entire video, I guess, is that we as players like our powerful effects, we like our unfair effects, and that can make deck building really rigid. And that's how we get to like stock versions of decks. That's why when somebody rocks up with a Blurple deck, it's like 58 out of the 60 cards are the exact same as, 100 other people in the room that are playing Blurple. And it's a reason I think that Dogs is doing so well at the minute, and we have to talk about it. Dogs has let's bring those stats back up. So Dogs is the best performing deck in the format. It has won 2 DLCs now. It has won a CCQ, and it is only getting better. I wouldn't be surprised if it won Taiwan next week. It is absolutely insane that it is doing as well as it has, and the only deck that comes close to this, in my opinion, was Set 9 Blurple. Something has to change. And depending where you sit, some people have been saying that that's a ban. Some people have been saying that Tramp 7 needs a ban, or Willow needs a ban, or Chromacon needs a ban. I'll come to each of you individually. David, I'll start with you, but do you think that the game needs a ban in this format?
I think it's really difficult to sort of almost call out for a ban when we're just about to move out of our core constructed season and into Infinity. But I don't see a reason to have a card like Tramp 7 that can cost 0 and can draw in excess of 6 to 10 cards, find the perfect answer you need. I don't see a world where that sort of card is fair. My concern would be that if we ban Tramp 7, then the Amethyst decks are just going to be on a tear again. And then we potentially have to look at banning an Amethyst card and then banning a Sapphire card. And for both of those, I think you have to look at potentially banning Genie or banning Sail the Azurite Sea or potentially a card like Cheshire Cat, which since the introduction of that card in Whispers of the Well, we have had these uninteresting board states where 8 to 10 characters are just stood upright because Cheshire Cat's going to create these value trades. So, yeah, I've not really heard anyone mention banning Cheshire Cat, but I think if we ban Tramp, Cheshire Cat has to go, and then Sail the Azurite Sea also has to go.
I actually like very much agree with your concluding point on that, right? Like if you're going to ban Tramp 7, get rid of Sail, and I would probably get rid of Elsa. Make people play the Isis if they want to have that exert effect, make them use the uninkable slots on it, and make it conflict with the Genie. The cat maybe is okay there. I think probably there are still ways for this format to develop. I think even like the Hiram and the Fortisphere ban were premature in that format. Red Blue was a very viable like way to play into Blue Steel in set 7 when those bans hit. And I think this is a point in the format where, it would probably we would lose the opportunity to see how people might react from here if we were to just immediately ban the Tramp 7. But I do think it is a very very correct point that the non-linear scaling of Tramp 7, both getting cheaper and digging through more of your deck as you have like more characters on the field, is actually fundamentally incredibly broken. I've been advocating on Twitter for sort of Chromacon as the actual problem point in the deck in terms of putting deck building restrictions into opposing decks that people seem to be unwilling to adapt to. But actually, I'm sort of rapidly coming around to the opinion that, the real problem card in this deck in a lot of different ways is the Tramp 7.
I'm kind of pretty much on the same camp. I don't know exactly what I would choose to ban. It seems like we always get around to cards with Emerald in it, and that end up becoming a problem. We've spoken about Trump Double Link in this case, and Emerald Chronicon here. It's a bit unfortunate though because I think it has unintended and sometimes hard to predict consequences in the format. Where you can sit here and say, okay, then we have to ban Sail, but that's a load of decks which then have to either be rethought or are inviable. And if we then go and ban a purple card, is that enough to completely stymie purple, or are we still just going to have purple decks running around? I think it's a little bit hard of a balancing act. I almost prefer bans don't happen, especially in a game that has rotation. But of course, with a deck that people are generally getting uh, unhappy with and doesn't have a great mirror match, because I don't mind a tier 0 format as long as we have a skillful mirror match. And it's not exactly the case, or at least some of the play patterns are egregious in the Dog's Mirror. I don't think that people can remain happy for very long. And at the end of the day, it's about getting the game to continue growing and the experience overall. And if the way to do that, then sure, but they have to really think it out.
Yeah, we can't just be throwing out bans left, right, and center. It's like you said, it's a fine tooth comb, right? They have to make sure that they're considering the play experience for the players, and then also what happens when they ban it. David, you made a really good point of if we get rid of Tramp, Amethyst just comes back, and we've already seen the discourse of Amethyst. People have been complaining about it since rotation set 9, set 10, saying that Amethyst is super dominant, and it probably would just take over the meta game without dogs keeping it in check. So, yeah, I kind of sit on the side of I don't think a ban's necessary. I think maybe the community as a whole isn't doing enough to explore options to answer the deck. I do think that there's innovation that we can be taking, and hopefully after this weekend, we'll start seeing players take some of those pieces and adding them in. Again, going back to Niall, I know he played against dogs on his green purple list and he beat it, and I just think that there's strength to bringing in a list that people aren't aware of and kind of exploring the unknown. So I think that's a really nice way to kind of finish the video of just kind of try something, explore something new, and then hopefully you'll get the results you want. We are moving into Infinity. For those of you that are playing in Taiwan or Brazil, you're still in core constructed, but for the rest of us, we're moving towards Infinity. So it'll be very exciting to see if these type of effects are as dominant there as they are in core constructed, but it's like an entire new Wild West, so I guess we'll see. But that is coming to the runtime of our show. So Bernardo, is there any final thoughts, any farewells or messages you want to send out before we wrap this all up?
I guess I can give a couple of shout outs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I had a lot of support this weekend. I really want to thank my partner for all the support she gives me to play this hobby, and then my team, João, Autumn, and Aska, and my friend Charlie, and then just the community of players in Chaos Cards and Dice who supported me throughout the time, and all the UK players. Got really fortunate that they even filmed the moment I got to Mickey, so I get like a little bit of a special memory.
It's cute. I managed to stay with Asker and Autumn over the B&B that we shared, and they sound like lovely people. And I know they were very happy for you when you won. And again, a huge congratulations for that and being one of the how many Golden Mickey UK winners do we have at this point?
4.
Four.
So number 4.
You are number 4, so a huge congratulations on that. David, I'll extend the same offer to you. Is there any shout outs or wrap ups that you would like to do?
Yeah, I would just like to sort of say my conclusion on the sort of DLC Ghent. It was amazing to see sort of the cap increase from 2,000 to 4,000 players. The excitement in that venue and sort of the experience that Ravensburger provided was incredible. I've been fortunate enough to travel to a lot of DLCs, and DLC Ghent was by far and away the most memorable, and it's got me super excited to go to more events. I would like to sort of give my first shout out to my team, Rarehunters. They picked me up at the end of last year. I've grown to love working with every single one of them. I would say they're not only one of the best teams in the world, but also incredible people to be around. And we just have a family that is so strong, and we're just so excited to grind and work hard in Lorcana. And then also a massive shout out to the UK community, and specifically Atlantis herself. Without this weekend, I don't think I would have been able to lock up my Continentals invite. You really encouraged me to innovate and explore and push myself beyond playing a stock standard list, and I'm really grateful, and I'm super excited that we're all going to get to play again in Paris, and hopefully Justice joins us after Dortmund.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the innovation that we managed to get through, but the support, not the support, what's the word for it? I think the reward really goes to Justice there for putting the UK server up. You know, none of this would have been possible without him. You got all of us together in a single Discord. You did the sprint. You organized the town halls. You set the team leads Justice. Like, we really have to give you a clap on getting all of that done. And the UK players, we put 6 players into Top Cut this weekend. Justice, you must be so proud about that, isn't it? As a project that you started off out of nowhere, going from UK players being the worst in the world to putting 6 into Top Cut, that's a huge change.
Yeah, absolutely thrilled at the sort of overall achievement. The goal is to put a UK player at Worlds, and I think we showed that with like 2 weeks of group practice, we are very likely to do that this season or next. We put 5 players who practiced with us into Top Cut this weekend, and as a collective, that makes us, the most winningest organization in attendance. And that's just an overall incredible achievement, right? We had plenty of other players, myself included, sort of 9-3, just missing out on a chance to get in on that invite. And we're going to be hunting it. We're going to be going to Dortmund, looking for it there. We've got more CCQs on the way, and I think everyone who doesn't get a qualification spot in time is definitely going to be attending the LCQs, and we'll see how many people we can end up getting in there in the end.
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting experience for us, definitely, getting continentals and then worlds. I cannot wait. The season has so much in store for us, but that is a discussion for another video. So I'm going to wrap this up now. Thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye from me. Goodbye from the rest of the team. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.